One day, I went to Divine Mother and I tried to thank her. I said, thank you, Divine Mother, for bringing harmony to my family. And she scolded me and said, of course there was no harmony because you were never there for them. You were too busy looking for God. I was shattered. I didn't say so to her, but I went home and cried and found excuses. I said, I've tried to be a good wife, I've tried to be a good mother. I've given a lot of service and giving. But she was very right. There are several stories. Let's see what they evoke in us. The first is that story about the priest, and he had served his flock as best he knew how. He listened to their sorrows and their woes, but it seemed that he was just a vessel for receiving nothing else but the traumas and tragedies of life. And he felt that perhaps if he took a respite, that he would find some solace and comfort and maybe an answer to a question that hadn't been formulated but seemed to be there in his being. So he went to a far-off, secluded monastery, and there he went into the chapel and knelt down in prayer. And as he was kneeling there, and the night came down, suddenly a voice whispered in his ear, "What are you leaving out?" And then the voice got louder and louder, ringing, it seemed, in every cell of his body. What are you leaving out? And finally he could bear it no longer because it seemed to be bouncing off the walls of the chapel and all through him, and he jumped up and he shouted, "What am I leaving out?" And he staggered down the cloister, the corridor in which the monks slept in their little cells. He knocked on the door and said, "What am I leaving out?" And a sleepy voice said, "Me." He went from door to door and door to door. And from each of them, when the question was asked, "What am I leaving out?" the answer came, "Me." He staggered out of the door of the chapel as the sun was rising, and he looked up and he said, "What am I leaving out?" And the sun said, "Me." He fell on his knees and put his head on the earth and wept, "What am I leaving out?" And the earth said, "Me." Then there's the story of that king. Oh, he was faithful to his people in the sense that he listened to them. He made sure that the granaries were full and people were taken care of. But the burden of his service as a monarch was great for him, and the only solace he could find was in hunting. So one day, leaving behind even the pages and courtiers who usually accompanied him on his hunts, he went on his stallion into the forest, where he captured sight of a deer, and he made chase, seeking to hunt it down with the sharp arrows that he kept in his quiver on his back. But it disappeared again and again from his sight, and he went deeper and deeper into the forest. Finally, the deer disappeared, and the king, sweating and tired, decided that perhaps his eyesight was failing because he was fatigued. So he decided to alight from his stallion and take rest under a tree. And just as he was sitting and his eyes were closing in sleep, he heard the crunch of leaves, and he looked up to see an old man approaching him. Immediately the king took his bow and arrow and pointed it at the old man and said, "Who are you and what do you want? Don't you know that I can shoot you down?" The old man with soft eyes knelt down in front of him and said, "Oh, great monarch, don't you recognize me? I have been in your service for many, many decades. Since a small child, I have taken care of the horses in your stable. I know the names of every stallion, every mare. I know their history. But you do not recognize me. I who have been in your service for all of these years. I am Ali Khan." The king was totally shamed, and he rose up to his feet and lifted the old man, and with his arm under the elbow of this old being, he walked back with him and listened to the stories of the history of all of those horses that had been taken care of in the years of his service. When he came back to his palace, he was changed. He vowed, and from that moment on, he took care to meet, acknowledge, and listen to every one of his subjects, and he became fulfilled, at peace, whole, in harmony. What do these stories mean for us? What do they resonate with in us? What are we living out?
It's always this me wants to be seen.
Yes.
Can not selfless serving that where you were taught or hoping for. Because it's still that me wants to be seen.
Yes, and acknowledged and recognized. Yeah. It's like that little anecdote about Mullah Nasruddin when he's sitting at the coffee shop and a wandering priest comes by and recognizes the Mullah maybe as a fellow pastor or priest, and so he confronts him and says, I am so selfless that I never think of myself, I only think of others. And the Mullah replied, well, I am so selfless that I am everybody else, so I can afford to think of myself. What does this tell us? How many times Divine Mother used to say, you're not counting your own chair. You're not counting your own chair. What does that mean?
We can't forget ourselves, even in all the midst of. There is such a thing as being selfless, but selflessness is pointless if we can't help ourselves.
Yes. Yes. And we don't acknowledge that we've got it. That's why it's said again and again. We have to know who we are, and we have to know.